Welcome back, students. Today's mini lesson is on punctuation inside the Nemeth code. We're already talking about Nemeth inside UEB contexts, and now we're talking about the punctuation inside the Nemeth inside the UEB contexts. We've already learned UEB punctuation, and outside of any Nemeth switch indicators, when you're in that UEB context, you'll use punctuation like you always do in UEB. However, inside Nemeth, punctuation has its own rules. Those rules historically are related to the eBay, the English Braille American edition that Nemeth grew up with, but sometimes even there, they're just their own thing. We're trying to make the punctuation that happens in and around math problems make sense in the math context. And that's a good idea. In Nemeth, that means we often use a punctuation indicator to tell the reader that the next symbol has its punctuation meaning. This is an indicator like any other indicator you've learned. The numeric indicator tells you the same kind of thing. So conceptually, this isn't really new. You use a grade 1 indicator to be clear that a cell should have its letter meaning. You use a numeric indicator to give cells their numeric meaning. In UEB, this might change the shape of a letter D to mean 4, the number 4. Now that we're in Nemeth mode, when your brain is already thinking that most things are numbers and probably have a numeric or related meaning, could be a number or an operation, now we're going to add the punctuation indicator to make clear that the next cell has its punctuation meaning. An example of this would be to make clear that a .23 is not the numeral 2 in Nemeth code, but instead has its punctuation meaning, a semicolon between major chunks of a list. So our punctuation indicator is used for regular punctuation occurring inside a Nemeth context, adjacent to or within math equations. There are certainly some special punctuation marks in math in general. We've got our math comma, which is a .6. It's not the .2 it is in UEB, because that would just be a number 1. So we use our .6 for this. A decimal point is a .46. We've got dashes and underlines and those sorts of things. We've even got a special math ellipsis, which is a set of .3s. These all have meanings in a math equation. An ellipsis in math means more things like what just happened keep happening until you get to this end state that we're going to show you next. It's a way to shorten a repetitive equation. So because those punctuation marks, the comma, the decimal point, dashes, and ellipses all have specific math meanings, they got their own punctuation marks in math that aren't confusable with anything else. They just come up so often that they needed their own symbols. But even in math contexts, we sometimes use other punctuation marks. And so in order to switch and use those from cells that would otherwise mean numbers, we use a special punctuation indicator. The punctuation indicator in Nemeth is dots 4, 5, 6. Let's look at how that looks in context. For example, I could be writing a list of numbers, and I'd put commas between things in the list, and then I might need a semicolon to separate one section of the list from another section. My punctuation indicator terminates my Nemeth mode, terminates my numeric mode. I'm still in Nemeth mode. We'll go up to the top of our document and set this whole document into Nemeth mode so that we don't have to worry about it. But it terminates my numeric mode. The space after it would terminate my numeric mode as well. So to write more numbers, I would need to put a numeric indicator again. Maybe I've got a set of 3s in my second set, and then I'll put a semicolon and make another piece of my list, and then I might have a set of mostly 4s and one outlier, because why not? I can't just put a semicolon right after that or it looks like the digit 2. So instead I use a punctuation indicator prior to my punctuation mark. And then it works. Then I've got my semicolon. Another example of this could be in the way that we do a lettered list. And this is a good thing to highlight here. You'll see it a little more next week. You've seen a couple examples of it in some PowerPoints and things already. But if I was going to have a list of choices, right? So actually, I'm going to terminate my Nemeth mode above so I can write a bit of a word problem. So I'm going to start my problem with problem 1. And I'm going to say, which is the best answer? And my transcription line is not going to know what to do with that because my computer doesn't know I stopped writing in Nemeth even though I use the switch indicators. And then I'm going to start Nemeth mode and give a bunch of answers in Nemeth. And the student can pick 1, 2, 3, or A, B, C, or D. In Nemeth, we always use the grade 1 indicator before a letter in a lettered list, in an enumerated list. And that's actually really just for alignment. But after my A, before I do my period, that period's not a decimal point and it's not a 4. Really specifically, it's not a 4. So I need a punctuation indicator before it. And then a space, which also terminates my numeric mode, even though one was never set here, just grade 1 mode was set. And then I could give my choices. I could say 14, choice B, 20, choice C, 35, and choice D, 50. Okay, so I have A, B, C, or D as a list here. In UEB, you wouldn't need any of the punctuation indicators, I realize, but in UEB, you also would not need a grade 1 indicator before A. If you were making an enumerated list, A period, B period, C period, for choices in UEB, the A would not have a grade 1 indicator, but B, C, and D would, so that they didn't say A but can do. Which creates this funny look to it, where the columns then aren't all lined up, the answers don't all start in the same cell. It's awkward. So in Nemeth, we put the grade 1 indicator in front of it anyway. It tells us a couple of things. It tells my math brain, this is a letter, not a variable. This is just like a letter meaning of the letter, which is different in math. Like X, the letter, and X, the variable that could be anything, are kind of different concepts. So that's cool. But it also lines up all my problems, and that's really handy when you're trying to efficiently read something. This punctuation indicator tells me the thing after it is a period. You say, well, of course it's a period. It's right after a letter. No. Nemeth is meant for math and science. And as you'll see later, something right after a letter is assumed to be a number because chemistry, right? Formulas do a letter and then a subscript number all the time. And so that's going to have its own rule later on. But to avoid it, our punctuation mark is made clearly a punctuation mark by putting the punctuation indicator in front of it. Keep in mind, a punctuation indicator or a grade 1 indicator terminate numeric mode. So after them, and the space would terminate it too, you will need to restart numeric mode at some point when you need to write a number again. And of course, anything that opens should always close. So if I've started my Nemeth mode, I should end my Nemeth mode. This same format would be used if I had multiple math problems to solve that didn't have this sort of interjecting set of text in it. If I just was doing problems 5, 6, and 7 on an assignment and they were equations, no words around them, and I wanted to just start Nemeth mode before all of those and end it at the end, I could even do a worksheet and number my worksheet in Nemeth by going ahead and numbering it from there. So I would write number 2 and write the 2 in a Nemeth 2, and then do my punctuation indicator and punctuation, and I could write the next problem. I could write 3 plus 7 equals what? And then I could go on and do a third problem on this worksheet and say 4x minus y equals, and give you a blank to fill in, right? I could do that and continue, and then when I'm done with the whole worksheet or with that section of the worksheet maybe, and that. I often see this sort of numbering problems in Nemeth occurring on worksheets that are laid out with a paragraph or a sentence or two of directions, and then 10 problems of that type, and then a new set of directions for the next section, and then a bunch of problems of that type that are all the same and don't have words in them. That can be a really efficient way to flip out of Nemeth, do all the instructions, flip into Nemeth, do all the problems. And in that case, you might find it easier to number multiple problems in a row in Nemeth code rather than switch out. If I switched out in between problems, then I wouldn't need to use the punctuation indicator, but I would need to turn Nemeth mode back on and off for every line if I switch these to UEB. So this is one of those moments where you start to see that in Nemeth, there are multiple right ways, right? This worksheet is the same whether I turn on Nemeth mode for a whole section and do all my problem numbers in Nemeth, or if I turn it on and off on every line and put all of my problem numbers in UEB. One way is not necessarily more correct than the other. There will be times coming up in this class where I will say, regardless of what you would choose, I want to see that you know how to do this particular way, so show me that you can number this in Nemeth, or show me that you can number this in UEB. That's just part of graduate school, seeing that you can do the task. But in the function of transcribing math for a 6th grader, there's not necessarily one way that's right and one way that's wrong. There are 2 right ways and 400 wrong ways. So be consistent within your own document. If your document makes sense to you and makes sense to your Braille reader and follows all the rules of Nemeth in UEB contexts, it's right, even though there's 2 and sometimes even 3 ways that you can accomplish that. If you're inconsistent, if you turned off Nemeth mode and then wrote the next problem number in Nemeth without restarting Nemeth mode, well then now you've created a conflict in your own document that is quantifiably not correct. So be consistent within your own work, make choices that you're happy with making. You have examples in your book of how to do the Nemeth. You've already learned how to do UEB formatting, so as long as you're picking a correct formatting style from one of the available systems, I'm happy with that. If you have any questions or anything comes up that stumps you or you want to see more examples, drop by office hours or ask in the discussion boards. And until next week, happy Brailing!